Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the UN Climate Change Conference is just a few weeks away and will take place under a backdrop of ambitious pledges made by the world's wealthiest nations, with extreme weather threatening human health and food security hitting Africa harder than any other region. Ensuring that the goals of COP26 preserve the continent's socio-economic development is crucial. Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, touched on these points during a visit to Imperial College in London. Channel's Business Global gained exclusive access and will be bringing you all the insights in a report. And a slim victory for Germany's Social Democratic Party at last month's election has led to complicated coalition talks. The successor to the country's much-admired Chancellor will face complicated issues. I'll be discussing some of them with analyst Arne Jagdjahan, who will be joining me from Stuttgart. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business headlines of the week. But first, as always, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK. On Monday, new simplified travel rules came into force as the controversial traffic light system was replaced by a single red list. Testing rules have also been eased for people who have been fully vaccinated in the UK, the EU and America. The changes were followed by a surge in holiday bookings, particularly from families desperate to enjoy some winter sun during the October half-term holiday break. In total, 47 nations were taken off the list, meaning anyone arriving from places including South Africa, Brazil and Argentina no longer need to be quarantined in a hotel. The red list now contains just 7 countries, all of them in Central and South America. They are Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Haiti, Panama, Peru and Venezuela. In other British business news, rising energy prices continue to dominate the headlines. Energy-intensive firms, including steel, paper, glass and chemicals, say they will be forced to close factories or pass on rising costs to consumers unless the UK government provides relief from soaring prices. British customers have some protection from rising prices thanks to a cap set by regulators, yet businesses remain exposed. UK natural gas prices have increased by roughly 425% so far this year. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, once again, energy prices dominating British headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been everywhere this week, and let's just explain a bit why it's so important. So energy prices have soared by 250% since January, it's 75% since August, and they continue to rise, and there seems to be no hope for a lot of firms that are dependent on gas and energy, and they have to pay a lot of bills to get their materials out there. There's a mix of reasons for this. There's been a real shortage of gas and energy across the world, really. Asia had a very cold winter last year, so they bought a lot of it. Also in the UK, we don't produce much of our own gas, so we're very reliant on the world market for it. And there's a bit of scepticism and question marks over Russia and whether they're they've been accused of restricting output, which they deny. So what's expected? Well, the latest news we've had in the last hour or so today is that firms are expecting to get government help worth hundreds of millions of pounds in loans. So the government aren't really in the business of bailing out any firms, although obviously if it gets to that point, that may be an option. But it appears that the Treasury have kind of their arm has been bent, and they will give loans to these companies because certain sectors, glass, ceramic, paper manufacturers, anyone really that are part of manufacturing industry or big industry in general, they really need some help, because otherwise they're going to either have to massively increase their prices, which will then have follow-on effects to other businesses and other customers, or they'll have to close. The Business Secretary submitted a formal proposal asking the Treasury to help on Monday this week. The Department for Business expects the Prime Minister to back its proposals, which could involve these state-backed loans. The number 10, the Treasury, haven't actually responded to this, but it appears that there is going to be some help. It's not official yet, but Boris will probably come out in the next few days and say, this is what we're doing. There has been a bit of a spin put on it by the government, which is is, as we're leading up to Glasgow in November, that, well, this just shows we should be doing more environmentally friendly things, you know, and this is why businesses need to move on. Well, that's a load of spin to try and put a positive spin on what's happening, which is, you know, that's obviously all good and well, but it's little comfort for those businesses that are dependent on energy right now. So there's no firm decision yet, but I think in the next few days and weeks we're going to see, you know, something along the same kind of guidelines as we've had in coronavirus support for businesses in the past, which will be state-backed loans, which will be repayable over a couple of years, probably interest-free. But yeah, no firm decision on that yet, but we'll obviously update when that happens.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Let's turn our attention to environmental issues now. In the run-up to COP26, the UN Climate Change Summit that will take place in Glasgow next month, the world has focused its attention squarely on ways it can tackle the climate change emergency. A frightening report released early this year by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that time is running out to save the planet as climate change is accelerating and intensifying. Scientists predict that the fires, floods and extreme weather seen around the world is just a foretaste of what can be expected if global heating takes hold. Africa has long been the hardest hit region of Earth's changing temperature. Last week, an open letter sent on behalf of 1.8 million fair trade farmers and agricultural workers worldwide appealed to world leaders to stop breaking their promises to low-income nations disproportionately affected by the climate emergency. As part of a series of UN energy events held here in the capital, Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osibanjo addressed students at Imperial College in central London. The Vice President touched on some of the challenges African countries are facing on the road to a clean energy transition. In just a few weeks' time, Britain will play host to leaders across the world, all of whom are desperate to find a solution to the ever-evolving climate change emergency. Food insecurity, extreme flooding, terrifyingly cold winters, and huge forest fires could all become the norm if the world continues burning fossil fuels at this rate.
The world has not listened well. This latest report by the IPCC provides, what is a stark warning. Code Red for Humanity was called by the UN Secretary General Guterres. And I will say this is a wake-up call for us. If we continue at the current pace, we will hit the 2 degrees warming by 2050 and pass the 1.5 degrees by 2040. This totally breaches the ambition of what was agreed in Paris in 2015.
COP26 is being billed as a game changer. Time is running out to save the planet from overheating, and observers are anticipating big pledges from the world's wealthiest nations to turn things around. But what about less developed nations, particularly the world's poorest, who have contributed almost nothing to the climate change emergency, but are the most affected from extreme weather events? During a visit to London to attend a series of meetings organised by the United Nations, Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osibanjo, addressed students at Imperial College London and touched on some of the challenges that African countries are facing on the road to a clean energy transition. Nigeria is playing a prominent role in shaping the continent's energy and climate change agendas in 2021.
Well, mainly, of course, there's a UN Energy Summit, which is part of what we're doing here. I met earlier with Alok Sharma of the COP26, the Energy Transition Committee. And here we're talking essentially about the process of getting to net zero by 2050. We're of course concerned that if some of the plans that the wealthier countries have are put into effect, we may be shortchanged. And that's because we already have seen the growing advocacy for defunding gas projects and gas investments. And for us, I mean, gas is an important transition fuel. And if for any reason we're trapped in a situation where gas projects are defunded, then not only will we have the problems of energy access and the implications for poverty, for extreme poverty, and the deepening of poverty, but also we will get to global warming anyway, where even today, I mean, Africa is the lowest emitter of pollutants and possibly one of the greatest sufferers of the effects of climate change. So if added to that, energy access is denied us, and the possibility of a fair transition to net zero is denied us, then for us it's essentially we're trapped. It's a catch-22 for us. And so one of the reasons why we're here is to prepare a lot of our partners and allies and, in fact, some of our academic collaborators for what we think is going to be a very important campaign.
The students were enthused by the Vice President's remarks.
I mean, just based off of what the Vice President said today, it's very obvious that, Africa is expected to do much more, whereas Africa is pretty much the least polluted, but the worst hit. And leading up to, obviously, the goals for 2050, it means that the expectations are quite alarming because you have all the developing countries who are the worst polluters, but not necessarily pulling their weight. Based off of the Paris conference, where the agreement was to raise at least 100 billion a year towards renewable energy, that hasn't actually been achieved. So just listening to the Vice President today, I'm very excited that Africa is working towards actually achieving that. But I'm hoping also that there would be openings where the finances needed to achieve this is made available. So, yeah.
The realities are completely different. And I think this is what's important with this talk with the VP, to bring a bit of nuance into the discussion, because the realities in UK, I'm living in there, but the realities here and in Nigeria are completely different, for example, just as a case study. And I think it's important the energy justice argument brings in that nuance into the socio-economic angle into sort of decarbonization, as it were.
Yeah, I think one of the key things I picked from his talk today was about the need for gas, right, and LNG, because we are very rich in gas, and it would be it's a bit unfair when you just say throw all of that away and you have to go to the renewable energy technology that is mostly, because again the technology for these things are not even readily domiciled in the country, so it's going to be another form of export, and where we could even have whereas we have the resources where we could even be exporting something. So I think it's going to be another form of import rather than export. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, so I think that we need to, when we're planning to go to net zero, we're planning on getting to net zero, we need to look at the importance and the role of gas, as I mentioned, in that transition. And I think it's very key. It's going to be the way for Nigeria to get there.
With US President Joe Biden pledging to double aid to developing nations, there are hopes that the future of Africa's road to net zero will finally be taken into consideration in Glasgow next month, though there is still a very long way to go.
Africa has emitted just under 2% of what the developed world has done. Europe as a whole has done 20 times more than Africa. The United States, 25 times more than Africa. China and India even more. But right now, the question is, after all this damage has been done, and they have done an amazing things with driving technologies and built their economies, and something which we all appreciate. But then we've been the victims of that. And then at this moment, when it's just time for Africa to take off, we stand in a position where we've been told, you have to repair the earth. You have to stop your resources. You have to back out, and you have to pay reparations to those who use your resources to build their economy. There's something fundamentally unfair with that.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, I'll be speaking with analyst Arne Jugjahan in Stuttgart about Germany's coalition progress. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking with analyst Arne Jagdjohan in Stuttgart about Germany's coalition progress. But before then, here's some global news for you. This week's IMF and World Bank annual meetings have been overshadowed by data rigging allegations against the International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva. Georgieva stands accused of manipulating data in China's favour in the 2018 edition of the World Bank's Doing Business annual report, while she was the bank's chief executive, a position she left for the IMF's top job in October 2019. She has denied any wrongdoing. France and other European governments have backed the Bulgarian economist to complete her term. US officials have asked for more time to study the irregularities. London's Heathrow Airport has reported September passenger numbers reached just 38% of pre-pandemic levels. Just 2.6 million people travelled through its terminals last month, compared with 6.8 million in September 2019. Bosses say the decline was driven by North American traffic being just a quarter of 2019 levels. Sydney has celebrated its own version of Freedom Day after living under lockdown for 107 days. The city was locked down in June to limit the spread of the Delta variant. Residents could only leave home for essential reasons like buying food. A successful vaccination campaign has now seen 90% of people over the age of 16 receive 1 dose of vaccine, and 74% have received 2 doses. People queued for pubs and shops that opened at midnight on Monday. Now to our final story. 2 weeks after a tight election, in-depth coalition talks continue in Europe's largest economy. The election-winning Social Democratic Party are negotiating a way forward with the third-place Greens and fourth-place Free Democratic Party. Representatives have expressed confidence that the three would form a new government this year, but at what cost? The smaller FDP Green parties disagree on taxation and spending, and though it appears as if Olaf Scholz will emerge as Chancellor, neither party wants it. Nothing is certain.
Wir freuen uns, dass nun Gespräche zu dritt beginnen.
And we are pleased that three-way talks are now beginning with the FDP, the Greens and the Social Democratic Party. We already found the talks held bilaterally so far very constructive, and we are also very grateful for the very professional and serious way in which both the Greens and the FDP have pushed the formation of the government so far. The citizens gave us a mandate to form a government. Recent polls show again and again that this is the will of the people of this country. It is now up to us to implement it. It is a matter of forming a government that wants to bring about progress in Germany and the necessary modernisation, a government that strives to tackle Germany's economic and industrial modernisation, that ensures that man-made climate change is quickly halted, and that also ensures greater respect in our society. That is what we will now discuss with each other. All parties coming together have such objectives, and tomorrow it will start.
Geht's dann los?
Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by analyst Arne Jagdjohan. He joins me from Stuttgart. Arne Jagdjohan, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. So it's been a couple of weeks. Can you assess the situation as it pertains to German politics? Because I know a couple of analysts across the world have tried to do so, and they haven't been able to decipher what exactly is going on.
Yeah, good afternoon from Stuttgart in Germany here. My pleasure to be here. Well, the election for us here in Germany is somewhat a political earthquake. It marks a turning point in German politics, and it seems a first indication that the time of the big 10 parties that reach 35 or maybe 40% on the national level, that time is over. We see a strongly fragmented political system that actually is being revealed now with the departure of Angela Merkel, very popular chancellor here. Yeah, so we see that the conservatives who have ruled the country for more than 15 years have suffered a strong defeat. And the election basically delivers a very complex starting position to form a new government for other parties.
Absolutely. You said it's going to be difficult. I know there have been ongoing negotiations, some insiders describing them fraught, as they would be, considering there's so many polarising opinions and views. But has there been any localised insight on what exactly is being discussed? Because it is really difficult to get any information out about what exactly is happening.
Yeah, I think the lead negotiators of the parties, they really make sure to keep things under control and to not have any information leaked outside. And this is, for us observers, it's very interesting to watch because it's an unprecedented situation on the national level. And there's no playbook for the parties of how this will play out. Just because of these dynamics that we have basically parties from very different ideologic political camps. Yeah? So you have the Green Party and the Liberal Party, who both will be most likely part of a so-called traffic light coalition with the SPD, the third one. They have major differences on how they view the world, on the role government should play, which then results in very different approaches towards taxation, for instance, and public spending. So we see a lot of dynamics play out behind closed doors, and I think it's a success for the parties so far that nothing of this comes outside. We are at a crucial point where the parties will have to demonstrate toward their own members, towards the base, towards the voters, that they enter such a coalition without giving up their own identity. And this is like squaring the circle. If you have the Greens and the Liberal Party joining in one coalition, it will be very interesting to see how they deliver on this.
Absolutely, it is fascinating, and the world is watching. The world is being promised a coalition before the end of the year. Is that likely to happen? And will Olaf Scholz emerge as Chancellor, which is where everyone's putting their money?
Yeah, we see a lot of political will, I would say, from the lead negotiators to make this happen. There's a strong urgency to deliver until Christmas, but it remains an ambitious undertaking. The parties are still in what we call here the phase of exploratory talks. So they have not even entered formal coalition negotiations. We expect that towards the weekend. On the weekend, the parties will most likely get a mandate from convention or the party boards to start formal negotiations. But that really much depends on what kind of stage the parties have agreed on right now. If this goes under the schedule and we have started the coalition negotiations on Tuesday next week, then I think it's somewhat likely that we will see a new coalition government before Christmas, yes.
Arne, before I let you go, I've got to ask you about Angela Merkel. No surprises that, she's holding on, really. I'm sure she thought that she'd be out, but she's obviously, the caretaker chancellor until this coalition is formed. The world has mourned her. How are Germans feeling about the end of such an extraordinary era?
Well, the Germans have gotten used to Angela Merkel for many years now, and I think she has taken quite some development herself over the last 16 years. But after this time, I think Germany is much in need of a makeover, of a fundamental makeover. We are an aging population, for instance. We've been slow to reacting to a changing world, and there are major tasks waiting for the future government. And if you look at this combination and this coalition, it's very clear that the industry must be converted to climate neutral production. We must accelerate digitization, and the bureaucracy that is proliferating around the country must be cut backwards. And I think that's a strong agenda for the incoming new government.
Thank you, Arne Jungjohann, analyst based out of Stuttgart. Thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Globe. I'm sure we'll be having you on to discuss some more updates on this coalition government. Thank you so much. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.